All right, and welcome back, everybody. Continuing our series here, diving into philosophy and the Western tradition that's been forgotten about. Many of the great thinkers we've been covering. We just finished a show talking about the great Schelling and his take on things. And today we're going to be doing understanding existentialism part two. So this will be part two. And hope you've been enjoying this series. I definitely have been getting a lot out of it. So good to see you as always, Michael. Welcome.
Oh, yes. You're a bit low. You were louder before.
Um, I'm
Maybe
same
just a little
volume.
bit.
Sounds fine on my end.
Oh,
Yeah.
you are? Okay. Yeah. It's been actually a long journey in the last couple of podcasts, but needed because we needed to go very slowly because of the multiplicity of themes that we're dealing with. We're dealing with, by the time you get to the idealists, you're dealing with 1700 years, if not more, say from the time of Plato. So there's been a lot of thinking in the Western tradition. So we don't have time to go through it all step by step. It's so much. And the whole art of it is, for me anyway, after all my decades of study, is to compress it, to deal with the highlights, the most important, to sift through it and find out what is really relevant to the audience today. And to make that even super relevant because of the things that are happening in the socio-political milieu. In our streets right now, we're on the verge of chaos, and everyone will have their idea of why that is. A lot of it correct. But sometimes the surface analysis is correct, but there's even deeper causes, right, that get to that. So when you're looking at the superficial reason, well, it's immigration. Oh no, it's bad government. Sure it is. But what underlies even that? And because that has to do with philosophy and psychology, a lot of people are not versed in it, don't understand it. It feels confusing. It feels not part of the modern discourse because it isn't. When you turn on mainstream channels, they're not talking about it. You get a little dab of it with somebody like a Jordan Peterson, but as I keep pointing out, my God, we had to wait that long through the decades to get to that? It's great. I'm glad to see it. Stefan Molyneux, brilliant, but it's limited, and we've had to wait such a long time, which means that the architects of control have had plenty of time to colonize those movements, to colonize the mind, the social mind through the media, and so that when real philosophy is actually broached, we're lost. This is our own tradition. Who was it who said? Orwell? Or somebody said, just tear up the fucking roots of history for the people. Just tear up their culture, tear up the roots. You've done it. Or the Jesuits have said, give me a child until they're 7, and I'll make the man, and I'll make him an obedient servant. Well, this is exactly it. Our own culture has not been taught to us by our parents. By the time we even get to college and school, it's either not taught, or in the days when it was taught in a very obscure and complicated, convoluted way, and often done in such a way as to make it unpalatable, forgettable. Who the hell cares about all that dusty stuff, all that Germanic stuff? Is what, and then we had 2 world wars with Germany. We've had nothing but conflicts since the early 18th century, and a disdain for their thinking. And even though America was very much involved with German thought in the beginning, really was, and the German was nearly the national language of America. People don't know that German was nearly the national language, not English. Think of South America, the Germans and the Austrians, their presence in South America, in Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Mexico. They had a great culture there. Most people don't even know about that wars were fought to pry the Austrian Germanic traditions out of South America. So there's been wars and campaigns against what we're talking about here. It's really incredible, So we've done a lot of justice, but then, as I promised before, there's the modern way of thinking about some of these same ideas. Doesn't mean that then you throw out what we've learned. That's certainly not the right idea. But there's a more of a phenomenological existential view of some. We'll look at some, so we're up to date, and so that then our viewer has a contrast. This is what education was really all about. Not to suspend thinking, but to stimulate it, to stimulate the gray cells. So the person who goes, well, first you present one thing, and then you present another, and I'm completely confused now. No, that's wrong. That's not the response that when people like me take a risk and don't do the dogmatic thing and keep things very open-ended and compare and contrast, you will lose people. You really will, because again, the paradigm is to hunker down on one particular vision and stick there for the rest of your life. And to me, that's probably one of the greatest tools in the arsenal of the enemy, is to have you do that, so that you lack the flexibility, you lose the context and the tactics to work it. And right from the very first book on Atlantis, in my conclusion there, I talk about that the psychic immunity that is required, the psychic hygiene, and that's what we're talking about, to break the consensus, to look at things this way and that. Now, if we go to the first slide, remember, just to get a little recap on where we were, if you will, that it was about the Hegel's question of the horrors of history. From the Platonic Hegelian view, history is a creation of the Almighty Spirit. Okay, but then the skeptic, the Schopenhauerian skeptic, is going to go, you must be crazy. Look at the horror, look at the suffering, look at the misery that's in history. Are you now associating that with God? Now, Schopenhauer himself didn't believe in God. He was an atheist. But the criticism does bear weight. It's not totally spurious. What is this Hegel thinking about? God is now a sadist? Is now the God that he is talking about? So we looked at one rebuttal, but to do that, we had to go deeply into German thought, German mystical thought, to talk about the contrarium. Because whether you like it or not, the contrarium does explain. It is a theory that you can bring up to explain that not just one problem of the history. It explains a lot of other things. It explains personality, the psyche, so many things, because the psyche itself is conscious and unconscious, the hemispheres of the brain. We went into all of that. So this contrarium then explains the horrors, because the horrors is the contractive force that recoils from engagement. We know it exists because we are products of the other side, eros. Our mothers met our fathers, produced children, and we do the same thing, and we engage and we reach out. Nothing abstract or religious about it. It is totally empirical. So obviously, if that expansive force exists, and we know it does, it's in our cells, we age, we grow, we develop, then so must the contractive black flame, as Jakob Bohm spoke of. The ground of how it came about is something to do with God's own conscious divide. We didn't explore that, but I have an article on that. Does God have an unconscious? And a member wrote to me in the week and said, well, is the expansive energy that you talked about, that's eros, that's prolific, that greets, that moves out, that wants to engage and expand, is that where the desire comes in? And yes, it can sound like that is, because yes, desire is a very good synonym for that movement out. However, don't forget that desire is also part of the retractive, contractive, the pulling away back into stasis and security is also born from desire. So in that case, watch out, because desire is bivalent in and of itself. So just to clear that up, yes, desire is part of the growth, but it's also part of the ungrowth and the desire to remain static and in the dark. So I think if you go to the next one, we will now see that Martin Heidegger, he's the philosopher we want to look at, who has a different take on this. Not the contrarium, but this horrors of history story. Let's go to the next one. Now, yeah, remember we positioned him before. In a previous podcast, we positioned where he's at. He was the man who had interesting things to say about metaphysics. And what is metaphysics? It's the old, I call it mysteria, but we won't bother with that. It's the predominant theories and metaphysical questions of the tradition. Primarily God, primarily the use of reason to extrapolate the mysteries. History became a big one for Vico, the Italian, and Hegel, people like that, that dominated many years of the philosophical narrative and discourse. And we had the humanism that sort of replaced it slowly, where the focus was on epistemology and who is the I that asks the question. And then we have the postmodernism, if you want to call it that, right? So really, Heidegger is fitting into the humanism. Historically speaking, he fits in at that part. He's a humanist thinker on the Lyman, right? Go to the next one. But we also saw, just an overview, and he called himself a phenomenologist and an ontologist. And his being in time is certainly has been seen as a kind of a existential work, and it really is. He protested about that, and that's only because he didn't like the direction that the French had taken existentialism, so he wanted to distance himself from that. But there's no doubt that despite his own protests, being in time is a very pure existentialistic work. Let's go to the next one. And a great deal could be said, about all of this, what those words mean. One thing that must be mentioned briefly, because we can't touch upon it now, is that he didn't really use the term consciousness, humanity, or man. He thought of the human being as what's known in German as Dasein, and it just means being there or being in the world. So in a future podcast or something like that, we might talk about that. It's not going to be relevant here, though. Go to the next one. It's just to point out that he did use odd terminology, Heidegger did. But for our purposes, no, that's not important right now. What is important is his whole problem, his whole view of the entire tradition. Going back to Aristotle, but Heidegger looked at the Cartesian tradition and the Kantian tradition and didn't like it. He didn't like the divide that had been placed between the self, the thinking mind, the thinking being, and the world that's out there. Remember we said the most real being pushed away? Heidegger is the champion of showing the connective roots, really just taking away that divide, somewhat like Schelling had done, but far more vehement dismissal of the Kantian issue, right? That divide. The way we would look at it is like this. Is like, look, Kant is saying that the noumenon and the phenomenon are divided. The phenomena of the world we understand, it exists. We see it every day in the form of appearances. The mind gives us access to that world of phenomenon. But behind the world of phenomenon is this noumenon or noumenal world of things in themselves, completely off limits to the mind, because you'd have to step outside your mind in order to apprehend them. So a table is not what you think it is. It's something else that you have no access to. You have access to the appearance of the table, and mostly that's good to go. That's what the mind allows you to know about the table, and so it is for everything else in the world. But the thing as it is in its actual self exists in another realm that we have no access to because we have a mind. And since there's no stepping outside the mind to check to see what the things are like in themselves, you're stuck. You're stuck in the world of appearances.